This is an IWP media production, brought to you by the Institute of World Politics, the independent accredited graduate school empowering the next generation of national security, intelligence, and international affairs experts. Learn from top scholar practitioners and acquire invaluable skills to propel your career. For more information, visit iwp.edu.
Hi, welcome back to the IWP podcast. I'm Jim Robbins, Dean of Academics at the Institute of World Politics, the private, independent graduate school of national security, intelligence, and international affairs located right here in Washington, D.C. Our guest today is Eric O'Neill, attorney, security consultant, public speaker, security strategist, best-selling author, and former FBI counterintelligence expert, who was involved in one of the most famous spy takedowns in history. Eric, thank you so much for making time for us today.
Jim, it is great to be here and great to be back at IWP and doing a podcast and tonight a lecture.
It's fantastic. We're really happy to have you. Your resume reads like a thriller, and in fact, your story was adapted for a major motion picture, which we'll discuss, and you have a new book coming out called Spies, Lies, and Cybercrime, November 7th?
October 7th.
October 7th.
That's right.
Fantastic.
So October is National Cybersecurity Month, National Security Month, and so we wanted to make sure that that book came out and got into everyone's hands right at the time that it's most important.
Perfect timing. So you're a local guy. You went to Gonzaga.
I did. Gonzaga College High School, right around the corner from here on North Capitol Street.
You're born here in Washington area?
I was not. I was born into the Navy. I was the last child born on the Charleston Naval Base way back when. I won't say exactly when. You can look it up. It's on Wikipedia. And my father was a submariner. So he barely made it back in time for me to be born. Then he had to go deploy again. He left right after his first deployment, his first series of deployments, and left the Navy. We moved up to Hamden, Connecticut. He went to Yale Law School. I think he graduated, near the top of his class in the Naval Academy and then near the top of his class in Yale. So I had some pretty big shoes to fill.
Right.
I wanted to follow him, which is why I didn't 100% follow him. And then we ended up in D.C. after he graduated law school. He took his first law firm job, and the only one he took. Unlike so many other lawyers, he stuck with the same job, which was, fascinating for someone who finally did become a lawyer myself.
Well, so you grew up in the spirit of public service. So is that what led you into, seeking employment with the government?
Not quite. I planned to go to the Naval Academy and didn't get in right away. I got in a year deferred, decided to go to Auburn University and study aerospace engineering. That was, at that time, the top aerospace engineering school. And then I would transfer to the Naval Academy after a year. And it turned out that I decided going into the Navy, I was doing ROTC, wasn't for me. Engineering wasn't for me, and radically changed my entire plan for my life, which, if you look at my resume, I've done many times. I've always believed in the theory that you have to pursue the things that you are passionate about and interested in. And if you don't, work is always going to be drudge. And I want work to always be fulfilling, exciting, and rewarding. And so I had the most difficult conversation I've ever had with my parents, telling them not only was I not going to go to the Naval Academy and follow my father and his father's footsteps.
Really?
I was going to leave aerospace engineering, move into psychology and political science, and then my hope was in the future to practice law. Now, I would have been better off, sticking with aerospace, and then it would have been easier to get into law school. I ended up graduating with a degree in psychology and political science, coming back to DC in the 90s, doing what everyone was doing then, becoming a consultant. He was a litigation-based consultant, and decided that at 21, I wasn't ready to sit behind a desk and look at Excel spreadsheets all day. And so I decided to return to the objective, which was public service, bringing it back to what you said earlier, Jim, And that was to find a different way to serve my country. And for me, that ended up being the FBI.
Fantastic. So, what was it like back then in the FBI? What was the culture like? What we're talking about the 1990s, right? Is
Right.
that yeah?
90s to the early 2000s. I suspect that it was a lot the same as it is today. Uh, I was a field operative. I was undercover 24/7. I never broke cover the entire time I was in the FBI, which meant that I worked out of black sites and field offices and, behind a 7-Eleven somewhere where we were about to track down a target, and was very rarely in the field office or headquarters, which meant that, like so many field operatives and special agents that are in the field, we would complain about the bureaucracy. And I'm seeing a lot of that today. And in fact, if you look at what it appears that the Trump administration is doing to the FBI, it's to try and cut a lot of the bureaucracy. That could be good or bad. Part of that is the machine of the FBI. But on the other hand, it's quite possible that it will allow the agents and employees who are closest to the work to make some of the more critical decisions themselves.
Right. How was that like on a day-to-day basis when you're, in black sites and undercover 24/7? I mean, how do you live like the normal part of your life, like
Right.
the social life or just, go to the grocery store or whatever? Like, how does that work?
It's very difficult. There are a couple reasons. One, working undercover inculcates in you a sort of way of seeing the world, yeah, a particular prism where you're always watching everything. You're looking at who's behind you. You're looking at who's in front of you. You're looking for threats. You can see people who worked in special operations just by watching how they walk in a room. They don't just blindly walk in the room. They are looking purposefully around the room, and they're looking for threats. They're looking for issues. They're looking for problems. I can't turn that off. And
Wow.
so it still happens. When I was working, it made it very difficult to have a normal life because when you work undercover, that is especially in the high-level counter-terror and counterintelligence work that I was doing, top spies, top terrorists, you don't really get to take a break. If your target moves, you move. If that means you have to break your plans or you don't get to go on vacation, you don't. So I was incredibly lucky that I met my wife and convinced her to marry me because there were many times where I would try to be dating someone and would just disappear for a few weeks.
Right. Oh, you ghosted me. Well,
Yes, exactly.
yeah. But it worked out. You managed to get married, have a social life. Like you could balance those things.
Balancing was very difficult, and there is a high rate of burnout in what I did. And also, I believe at one point had the highest rate of divorce in the FBI
Understandable.
because that undercover work can really be destructive. It's not only that you're working undercover, it's that you can't tell the people who are closest to you anything about what you're doing. So there's a massive part of your life that is completely walled off. I mean, there's still countless cases that I work that I can never talk about that just have to sit inside me. And I mean, I'd love to write books about them. I'm an author, but I can't.
right.
Maybe one day I'll get permission from the FBI, and the FBI did give me permission to write my first book, Gray Day.
Yeah.
But
Which was years later.
which
though.
was years later. Yes,
Yes.
yes, years later.
Yeah. We did a recruiting event over at Langley, and they were advising the students, if you're going to get married, marry somebody in the agency.
Yeah.
It makes life a lot easier. They also said that the CIA is the best dating pool in Washington because people have a job, they've got security clearances, they check out, and, they're inside the tent. So you don't have to worry about a lot of the problems you would have to worry about if you were dating outside of the tent.
Yeah, there's no real being outside of the CIA. Even if you are a CIA intelligence officer and you're stationed overseas and your wife and family go with you, if it's a non-dangerous location, right? Your wife will be briefed in and will be expected to help.
Yep.
You might be on a walk, holding hands, following a target, right? And so, yes, it makes a lot of sense if you're going to be deployed overseas and they're going to be read in anyway to both be in the service.
Right.
That way, I had a female partner when I was in the FBI working undercover. with her was great because we could create all sorts of different scenarios in how we approached undercover work.
So speaking of that, I mean, you were involved in the takedown of Robert Hanssen.
Yes.
Centrally involved in that. One of the most notorious traitors in American history. Maybe you could remind our audience about the Hanssen case and what was involved in that.
Sure. Well, Robert Hanssen was the most damaging spy in FBI's history and arguably America's history. For 22 years of his 25-year career in the FBI, he was about to retire with his full pension. He was Russia's top spy in the United States. In fact, to be completely accurate, he was the Soviet Union's top spy in the United States, and then Russia's top spy. So he was able to survive the collapse of the Soviet Union, which was incredibly impressive because when the Soviet Union collapsed and the KGB was disbanded, the former KGB spy masters were stealing information and selling it to the highest bidder. So we were catching all the Cold War spies, but never caught Hanssen. He went dark for a period of time to see how things settled down. And when the Russian Federation was formed, Robert Hanssen reactivated himself and continued to spy for years later. The damage that he caused was in the billions in terms of cost to the United States' intelligence. Between the years of 84 and 85, which we called the year of the spy, sort of halfway between 84 and 85, which was the height of the Cold War. I mean, it was a really cool time to be in the U.S. I mean, 84, 85 was a great time to grow up, but but the Cold War had hit its highest point of steam. We lost every single asset in Russia. So all of our spies, they were either flown back to Moscow, executed, or pressed into hard labor. And Robert Hanssen, the top FBI spy, and Aldrich Ames, the top CIA spy, share all of those revelations of those spies.
Right, because they were in counterintelligence.
Yes.
So as targets, I mean, from a Soviet point of view, that's who you want to target.
Exactly.
The people who are watching the watchers.
And he gave up undercover operations that we had spent countless careers building, undercover operatives who could no longer work, and that puts them in incredible danger. I mean, sometimes your cover is the only thing that protects you from a bullet to the head or being burned and not able to work and not able to do your job. And he gave up lives, those people who were murdered. And of course, in the height of the Cold War, he gave up our nuclear secrets, what we would do if there was a nuclear war. So it turns out that the Soviet Union had our playbook.
Right.
I don't think anyone wins a nuclear war, but you sure don't want to be lining up against the other team and they know all of your plays before you make them.
Right.
This is a really bad guy, and he did it mercilessly and took very little money for the amount of secrets that he gave up.
What was his motive then? I mean, everybody here at our school has worked for the government in one capacity or another. We've all taken the oath. I mean, I think we all look back with pride on our government service. And you look at a guy like this who spent most of his career, 90% of it as a traitor.
Right.
What motivates a guy like that?
Yeah, the great question. Why did Hanssen do it? And we always want to know why someone chooses to betray. Like, why would someone who has taken an oath and is serving the United States, but also has betrayed his family, his religion, his faith, why would he do something like that? Well, the caveat to my answer is no one actually knows. He took that secret to his grave. Years of interrogation. He refused steadfastly to answer that question. It was his last scrap of narcissistic power that he was able to hold back, because he would always say, you don't need to know that. I've told you what I did and how I did it. That's what you need to know to fix it, but you don't need to know the why. I think I know, because we were locked in a room 9930 in FBI headquarters for hours and hours every day with nothing to do but talk to each other, which was the design of the FBI. And I learned a lot about Hanssen. And in fact, at one point, the FBI discovered that Hanssen was recruiting me to take over, to continue his legacy.
Wow.
So he got very close to explaining all of this to me, and I was able to put the pieces together. I think Hanssen joined the FBI out of a desire to be a spy hunter. He was a James Bond aficionado. His father was a police officer. He wanted to serve. He wanted to be in the field. He wanted to be hunting spies. He wanted to be using his Walter PPK and Leica camera and becoming his hero from all those movies and books. And he joined the FBI, and he was assigned to a desk in Chicago, which is where he's from, the Midwest. That didn't make him happy. He wanted to be in the middle of counterespionage, so he insisted that he be moved to D.C. or New York. Within 2 years, he was moved to the New York field office. And he was married, he was having children, and he couldn't afford his life. So he needed money. At the same time, he wasn't put into the field. The FBI quickly learned that he was not a good operator, but he was a brilliant analyst, one of their top analysts, particularly against the Soviet Union. He knew everything about them.
Now,
So they made him an analyst. This angered him. And you sort of, if you want to get into his head, he wanted to be James Bond, and the FBI made him a librarian. That's how he was thinking. Now, analysts are the most critical part of intelligence. Analysts are the bread and butter of intelligence. A field op like me, without an analyst telling me where to go, I'm just in the wind. Who to hunt, who to track, where to go. Give me actionable intelligence. That's what analysts do, and they're amazing at it. And he was incredibly good at it. But he was mad. So we have a disgruntled employee who didn't get the job he wanted, who needs money, and doesn't feel like the FBI is giving him the kudos, the appreciation that he deserves. And he's a textbook narcissist. He's someone who always has to be right, who believes that he's at the top of the food chain and that everyone should be listening to him. That's a perfect ingredient for a trusted insider, aka a mole or a spy.
right.
And so he chooses to betray, to get back at the FBI, to make the money he needs. And his first act of espionage is to volunteer his services to the Russians by sending them a letter exposing 2 of our top spies in Moscow who were immediately executed. So his first act of espionage, he hasn't even gotten any money. He does that to establish his bona fides, as he says in his letter. He gets 2 people killed. I mean, he comes out with an amazing bang. He never lets them know who he is. And that is why he was so successful for so long.
Huh. So are people working the other end of it never, because the Soviets didn't know?
The Soviets didn't know his identity, so our spies couldn't say, this is, you have a mole, right? Now, we knew we had a mole because everything was going wrong. And Hanssen was in some ways protected by the arrest of Aldrich Ames, where the intelligence community thought, oh, we've caught the mole.
Right.
Aldrich Ames must be this legendary spy that was only codenamed Gray Suit. I mean, the spy of spies, the greatest spy to ever be hunted, someone who decades of different FBI agents and NSA and CIA hunting, looking for this person. I mean, entire careers.
Yes, Angleton.
Yeah, exactly. Just trying to find Gray Suit and never finding him, getting close and never finding him and finding out. Then Ames was caught. We thought, oh, we got him. But the spying continued.
Right.
He went dark a little bit after Ames, but then he felt like, okay, the heat's off me. Our assets in Russia didn't even know what agency. And because Hanssen was able to get on different task forces, he was not only working with other agencies, he was at one point a supervisory special agent put in charge of FBI legal attachés to go audit them. He was able to steal information and cherry pick it from all over. So the Soviets had no idea where this person was. Of course, they're trying to figure out who he is. So they didn't know our spies didn't know whether to say, you've got a mole in the FBI, the NSA, the CIA, where it was coming from. So he was like the bank manager who's stealing from his own bank and knew how all of the security operated.
Wow. So because he wasn't America's top spy catcher, he became Russia's top spy.
Exactly.
It fed his ego and his
He
narcissism.
became the most successful spy in history in his mind. If you asked him about other spies, he would denigrate them and list all their flaws. He hated Aldrich Ames because I think he saw Ames as his biggest competitor. He would say all sorts of things like Ames was a drunk and a cocaine addict and a total loser and got by because he was lucky and they finally he would say if you mentioned another spy to him who looked like Walker or anyone who looked like a top tier spy, he would tell you all the reasons why they were no good, why they were a junior varsity, right?
What a strange competitive mindset that is.
Well, everyone wants to be the best at something.
Yeah.
Everyone wants to be able to say, I am incredible at this one thing. This is my thing. Like I like to say, I'm great at going on stage and speaking to people. I'm a pretty good writer. We're proud of those things, right? We all have something like that we realize I've got a talent. For Hanssen, it was spying.
Incredible.
And even when he didn't need to spy anymore, that's a difficult thing to give up.
Amazing. So how did you get on the case?
Well, I was brought into the case in the most abrupt way possible. My supervisory special agent, an agent named Gene McClellan, an amazing guy, showed up at my house randomly on a Sunday. Scared the hell out of me because supervisors don't do that. And I came out and spoke to him, and he asked me if I'd ever heard of Robert Hanssen, and I hadn't because I never worked that case. And he said, "Good, because we want you to go undercover to catch him," which was strange to me. Like, why did you come to my house to tell me that? You couldn't wait? He said that my next meeting is with the director of the FBI, and I need to tell you whether you're in or out. Now, years later, after having conversations with Gene and writing a book about it, I know what was going on. Hanssen was about to retire in April. We learned about Hanssen in December. So a former KGB intelligence officer gave us a file of information that pointed right at Robert Hanssen. Hearts fell throughout the FBI because Robert Hanssen wasn't just the top Soviet analyst and then Russian analyst. He was also at one point put in charge of the case to catch Graysuit. So he was put in charge of catching himself and sent the FBI wild goose chases for years. So I'm asked to go undercover. And the reasons are, if you look at the psychology of the situation, they line up well. Hanssen would have never trusted someone who was a peer, someone who was his age, someone who was a decorated agent, in working with him in this brand new division they created called the Information Assurance Section, which was ostensibly building cybersecurity for the FBI. They gave him his dream job, promoted him to executive service, gave him everything he always wanted, so he would stay and so he would spy, and we would catch him red-handed.
Right. So they already suspected.
Oh, they suspected that he was the spy. One of my jobs was to confirm, and I did that pretty quickly. But they suspected that he was the person that we were after. But they couldn't let him retire. They didn't have enough on him to not only put him away for good, but to put the pressure on him to get him to explain what he'd done, which was really the most important part of this case. The most important outcome was to leverage him to the extent that he would honestly tell them what he'd done so the FBI could fix it. Because our ability in the United States to conduct counterintelligence, the science of countering spies, had been blown to pieces by Hanssen over decades. We were completely at a loss. There were entire careers of counterintelligence agents who were wasting their time because the Russians knew everything we were doing before we did it. So we had to fix that. We also had to learn how we did it so that we could instill protections in the FBI to prevent a trusted insider. Like, how did he get away with this for so long? So we had to catch him red-handed, which meant he had to spy, and someone had to catch him doing it. So couldn't have a senior agent. The other problem was the senior agents had no freaking clue how to turn a computer on. The FBI in the year 2000 was in this big computerization push, but they hadn't really got there yet. They were still handwriting memos.
Right.
And I was an old hacker in the 80s. Hanssen was a hacker as well. He's a bad guy. I was a good guy. So you had the white hat hacker and the black hat hacker, right? One had to win. I was also Catholic, and his faith was incredibly important to him, even though he didn't. I like to say he believed his faith, he didn't live his faith. So someone that, if you're going to throw two people in a room and you want trust and you want communication in what's called an elucidation operation, they need to talk to each other. So they had to find these commonalities. I was in law school at the time. I was a 2L at GW going nights. His oldest son was at Notre Dame in law school. And I knew how to turn a computer on. I could program, I could write code, I could build computers, and he was a complete computer geek. And we were doing the job of cybersecurity for the FBI. So it all fit. And they decided they'd throw me in the room, and they realized they knew enough about Hanssen to know that he just really wanted someone he could guide and mold in his image and mentor. It was something that he just desired.
Right. Well, consistent with the narcissistic personality.
Exactly.
Yeah. He wants to clone himself.
And it worked out. And the FBI, I mean, their analysts are great, right? As I said, I mean, they're some of the best in the entire world. Their psychological profiles are always spot on. And they profiled me and they profiled him, and they threw me in there. And there were 3 different squads working this case. Some were looking at the Russian source, some were looking at Hanssen and his life, and some were running me undercover in the office with him. All 3 squads had a bet over who was going to find the information that led to his arrest first. My squad won. I didn't even know about this bet. They didn't tell me about it. I wasn't in on it, so I didn't make anything. I guess you can't bet on yourself. But the other 2 squads bet that I was never going to be the one who won. In fact, I would be the one who screwed this up because I wasn't trained to do it.
Right.
And that was the big problem. You throw someone who has no training to go undercover like this into a room with the biggest spy in U.S. history. I mean, who would have thought I'd ever succeed?
Right. But you were able to build a relationship with him.
I did. It just turns out that you sometimes find yourself in completely difficult, untenable circumstances, and you rise to the challenge. You find a skill or a resolve within yourself that you didn't know it was there. And that was me in that moment. Now, it wasn't as easy as it sounds. It was a horribly trying time of my life. I barely skated by and keeping my marriage together. I got my first and only C in law school during the time that I was, everything else was an A. I call it Hanssen C. I just couldn't make it to class and I couldn't study.
Right.
I still, for years later, I suffered PTSD for some of the things that happened during that case.
Wow.
And but I succeeded. I rose above, and I was able to outsmart Hanssen.
Mm-hmm. What was the key thing that closed the case? Like, what was the thing that he did or that you found out that really put it in?
Yeah, I call it my light bulb moments, right? And we all have light bulb moments, and any innovator, when you're struggling, you're trying to find out the answer to something, and then it clicks. It flares up in your mind. Everyone who invents something has this. Every entrepreneur who comes up with a new business idea, every writer who writes that perfect sentence to start their book, these light bulb moments are so critical to success. And mine was that I realized what I was doing in the case was reacting to Hanssen, which is exactly what he wanted. He could find out if he was safe, if he could get me to react to him and make a mistake. And I was so careful and cautious and working hard not to make a mistake. I wasn't trying to achieve. I wasn't trying to go above and beyond. And what I like to say in my keynotes is you have to take risks to succeed. If you're only doing the minimum, then you're never going to succeed. You're just going to stay in the status quo. And I thought long and hard about what I did undercover as a ghost, and all of the success I had is I took risks. I took calculated risks, but I took a lot of risks, and often they paid off because I was very good at my job. And what I had to do here was take a risk and try to catch Hanssen. So I used everything that I learned about Hanssen and realized that I wasn't finding any of the information that would lead to his arrest anywhere. Our conversations, obviously, I couldn't ask him, But we knew that a drop was coming, and there was huge pressure on me to find the smoking gun. And the smoking gun ended up being his Palm Pilot. And this is a personal data assistant, which was big in the 2000s.
Right. These days you have to explain what Palm Pilot.
Yeah, I have to. Right. And I
It's
asked.
kind of like this.
I ask. Yeah, it's nothing like an iPhone. I ask my audiences when I speak, how many people know what a Palm Pilot is, and every year fewer hands go up, right? And everyone whose hands goes up, they just have a good laugh. And it's basically a personal data assistant. And the innovation was you could get data in it, not just by typing on a little mini keyboard, but by stabbing the screen with a plastic stick called a stylus, right? And it was basically an Outlook counter when you could organize your calendar in a really big, beefy thing that, he kept it in his back pocket, so he couldn't sit down on it. And every time he took it out of his pocket, he would put it in his bag. And it was a clockwork act. It was a routine. So I said, I got to get this away from him. And so we took a risk. I brought into a section chief and who was read into the case, who was technically Hanssen's boss, although Hanssen would never admit that. and an assistant director of the FBI, who I knew Hanssen hated. He was read into the case specifically for this. They come in unannounced. They challenge Hanssen to shoot while we're sitting down at his desk. So I know the Palm Pilot is in his bag. And he's very upset, right? Everything that I learned about Hanssen, he doesn't like to be challenged. He doesn't like to be interrupted. And he hates everyone above him in the chain of command. The only thing I could have done better is have the director of the FBI come in. And so we can't say no. And they leave to go shoot. And I'm excited. There's Palm Pilot's right there.
Right.
I wait until they're down there in the range, in the basement, sub-basement of the FBI. There's a firing range down there. I have an asset down there who texts me. I go in and I find his Palm Pilot. I find a data card and a floppy disk. That's 3 things. All has data on it. Run down 3 flights of steps, hand it off to a tech team, and they start copying it. And he's encrypted all of this, which he had told me, which is really why I wanted the data. Because you encrypt things that you want to protect, right? Especially from eyes that you don't want seeing it. And as they're downloading the data, I get another text. Don't know what happened. He's coming back to you. So I've seen the CCTV footage. He gets in there. He sends his target down range. He empties a clip. He brings it back, looks at it, holsters his firearm, and abruptly leaves. It doesn't say why. Just leaves.
Right.
Because he probably figured, I don't have my Palm Pilot.
Mm-hmm.
And it turns out that was the smoking gun. They hand it to me. I run. I get there in the office about 2 minutes before him. I get to his bag. I kneel down and rookie mistake. I can't remember what pockets I pulled this thing out of. So now I'm doomed. And I'm trying to kind of cycle back and remember. And I hear him coming through the main door. And I'm in his office. And I know that this is the end of the case if I get this wrong. So I just dropped all 3. I zipped up all 4 pockets, ran to my desk with the best poker face I've ever had right there. And he comes through, glares at me, goes into his office, slams the door, and I hear the telltale zip. And I knew that I either got it right, and I had to be there because he must have moved into paranoia from suspicion, which is bad. You don't want your target there.
Right.
Or I got it wrong, and I had to talk him back into it somehow. And I'm trying to come up with some stupid excuse like I tripped over your bag and everything fell out. The zippers popped open like magic. I don't know, but I didn't know what I was going to say.
Right.
And then he comes right out of his office and leans over my desk and he asked if I was in his office. Now I'm a Boy Scout. I'm always prepared. So I said, yes, I was in your office. I put a memo in your inbox, which I did.
Right.
And he just stares at me. If you want to know how that feels, the next time you go in a crowded elevator, instead of turning around and facing the doors like everyone does, don't. Face everyone in the elevator and just stare at them. See how uncomfortable they get. Like, people don't do this, right?
Right.
Hold that stare for a heartbeat longer. And instead of reacting, I just got angry and I stared back at him. I said, "What's your problem?" And he says, "I never want you in my office again." And he leaves for the day. And within a week, he's on a bridge in Foxstone Park. He's made his last drop to the Russians that he ever will. He's about to retire. He's already got a job in cybersecurity. And he's arrested. And we not only knew where he would make that final drop, but exactly when, at 7:13 at night on Sunday before President's Day in February, because the Palm Pilot's a digital calendar.
Right.
And as I like to say, that is how you catch a spy.
Amazing. So the next time you saw him after he was arrested, how did that go down?
I never saw him again after he was arrested.
That was it.
I made a request. The FBI originally said, yes, you can go meet with him. It was going to be easy. He was in Pennsylvania, in a penitentiary in Pennsylvania for quite some time. But then the last minute, they denied it. And they said, we've reconsidered. We're still trying to get him to plead guilty. And we're afraid that if he knows that you were the one to have betrayed him, he'll lawyer up. This was their quote. He will rattle the bars of his cage, lawyer up, and won't plead. Because it was so important to him that he could trust me. And it turns out that I was the one who caught him.
Wow.
And then I tried for years to get into Supermax prison in Florence, Colorado, where he spent the rest of his life and died in June of 2023, and couldn't get in there. Just couldn't find a way. I tried with the FBI, the Bureau of Prisons, and he was buried so deep there was just no way to get in.
Wow, I bet he'd love to see you.
I think that, well, one, his life was miserable. He could, as I understand it, he had a tiny TV he could watch out in the hall that had curated news in black and white, paperback books, and that was the entire extent of his stimulation. He couldn't talk to people at all unless his family visited or his priest. He spent 23 hours a day in his cell, and 1 hour the gates would open and he could follow a corridor to an outside courtyard where he could look up and see the sky but could see nothing else. There was a pull-up bar in that courtyard, that's it. So he'd just walk around outside for an hour. I would rather be dead. So I suspect that the opportunity to sit across a table from me and revisit that moment would have been exciting for him. It would have been different. It would have been outside of the routine.
Oh, sure.
And I really wanted it to be the last chapter of my book.
There you go. Thinking like a writer. That's good.
Right.
That's very good. Well, I'll tell you, I don't feel sorry for him.
Yeah, very few
given
people
what he
did.
did, and how many people were dead as a consequence of his
Exactly.
actions,
That said, I was asked, and I did some interviews after he died, and I had to admit that I had an emotional response because Robert Hanssen was one of the pivotal people in my life. That case was the seminal case for me, at least in my FBI career, and it's a case that very few people in intelligence work will ever do, entire careers. And it changed everything for me. It opened every door imaginable. There was a award-winning movie, made about me by Universal Studios, Breach.
Yeah, Ryan Phillip.
Ryan Phillippe, he plays me. Chris Cooper plays Hansen. Dennis Haysbert is in the movie, and Laura Linney. It catapulted me into a speaking career, which is something that I never even thought was in the cards. And it turns out it's one of the things I'm most passionate about in life. And I probably would have never found that opportunity. My first book was written and did quite well, a bestseller because of that case. And my next book is about to be published. And, I owe him those things. And if I could have met with him, I would have told him all that. I would also told him that I would go back in time and catch you all over again.
Yeah. Well, yeah, he's just got to have been thinking about what did he, what could he have done differently to get away with it. I'll bet that gnawed at him a lot.
I suspect in his mind, because of his narcissism, he told himself that he knew all along and wanted to be caught. That's what a narcissist would say. That he was tired, that he was done, and he wanted to be caught so he could tell everyone his genius.
Right. Oh, well. Didn't work out for him.
Not quite.
Well, speaking of cybersecurity, let's talk about your new book. I mean, you've been at cybersecurity for over 20 years.
Yes, for quite some time.
And I mean, people are aware of it now, but they haven't always been. And it's an increasing problem and issue that we're facing. So what does your new book have to tell us?
Well, my new book is titled Spies, Lies, and Cybercrime. We just changed the title a couple of days ago. That's the way it goes. Your publisher says, I don't really like your original title. Let's think of another one. And this is the title of my up-and-coming newsletter that I put out about half a year ago. That's growing. It's what I wanted to do was write a book about cybersecurity that wasn't boring, that was entertaining, and was based on the lessons I learned as an FBI undercover intelligence operative, as a student of counterintelligence, and apply that to cybersecurity. So what the book does is it teaches you to think like a spy hunter by breaking down, using espionage concepts, 7 different ways that cyber criminals are attacking us. And then in the second half of the book, it flips into teaching you how to act like a spy hunter. So you think like a spy, act like a spy hunter by using counterintelligence techniques to defeat cybercrime. So it's a really fun book. And I use a first-person narrative as a through story in the book of how I was in the middle of a massive ransomware attack. that has its origins in Russia and Ukraine, and a humanitarian institution that's doing work, and how we were able to defeat the ransomware attacker, the number one ransomware group on earth right now, this cybercrime group called Lockbit, and tell them to pound sand and save the organization millions and millions of dollars.
Wow.
So it's an exciting book, and it reads a little bit like a thriller, but it'll teach you everything you need to know to defend yourself against cyber attacks. And one of the most rewarding things for me as an author is my beta readers each have read it and have come back and said, I almost clicked. I almost fell for this trick. I almost fell for this scam, but then I thought about what you said and I didn't. And that's what I want all my readers to be able to do.
Excellent. We were talking earlier about how, and you said it's like a buyer's market for people on the dark web recruiting intelligence agents or, experts from adversary countries, maybe even from U.S. sources, because these people have side gigs.
That's right. Everybody has a side job these days, right? Since the COVID pandemic sent us all home and we were sort of half doing our job, but then also looking at something else, and people got into influencing, and people got into selling on Amazon, and people got into all these things. Bad guys have side gigs too. These cybercrime syndicates are not your hacker sitting in a basement somewhere. They are well-funded. They are well-sourced. They have entire business verticals. They have marketing teams. They have payment processing teams. They have development teams that are building unique code. They're hiring people. They have HR divisions. They are using the dark web as their base of operations. So for the most part, it's very difficult for law enforcement to find them. And even when law enforcement smashes them or destroys their servers, they just restore from backup and come right back. In my new book, I list about 4 or 5 examples of major crime syndicates who are quashed by the FBI and then come right back and launch an even bigger attack. And they have hiring. And if you look at their dark web message boards, if you're a dark web spelunker like I am, you go down in the dark web to go, into the seedy underbelly of the internet to learn about these new attacks and help companies protect themselves from them. You'll see that their message boards are hiring, and they hire intelligence officers who are the best in the business at cyber attacks. All espionage has changed from the old dead drops and signals and meets and train stations and exchanges and brush passes of old to cyber espionage. It's so much easier to sit in Moscow or Beijing or Tehran or in any of the countries that are coming after United States information and sources and launch a spear phishing email and never have to get on a plane, than to come over here and do the slow recruitment and send in a trusted insider and have them extract the information. Cyber attacks are much easier and have a bigger yield. So this cyber crime is almost a spin-off of cyber espionage, which has, for the last 20 years, been the way that espionage occurs. Cyber crime, when we all decided during the pandemic to change the way we work, before cybersecurity was ready to get ready for it, it grew to a juggernaut, and it's only grown exponentially since then.
That's astonishing. Well, I know we're running short on time, but referring back to something you said earlier about the FBI today and Trump cutting bureaucracy or whatever. What are your observations on the current state of play with Kash Patel coming in and whatever changes are going on? What do you think?
Well, what I've said is that I hope that Kash Patel, as an outsider, will come in and look at some of the dysfunction in the FBI. And a lot of the dysfunction that we've seen over the last number of years tends to be on the 7th floor of FBI headquarters, where the executive team is. There's some bias there. You never want to bias in any investigation. You always have to go in completely neutral. If you bias going into an investigation, you will find a way to make that person guilty or not guilty. You have to go in completely pure in any investigation and just absorb facts and let the facts lead you to the truth, right? If you come in with the truth that's in your mind, you'll find a way to make the facts fit your truth. And that's not how you act as an investigator. There have been some problems there. And of course, a lot of it was directed at Trump. So clearly he's pretty angry.
Yes.
And he sent in someone to detonate a bomb in the end, kind of like a a PR, a personnel bomb in the FBI and try to weed some of that out. I don't know how successful he'll be. The FBI is a very powerful institution that is incredibly resistant to change. I think it could be streamlined. I think it could be leaner. I think we can devolve a lot more of the decision-making to the field offices, and I think that's a very good thing. I can remember being in the FBI and desperately needing a radio that didn't burn my skin when I, shoved it under my shirt and, jumped out of a car to chase someone down. And instead I would get my 6th pair of binoculars because someone at headquarters thought they knew what field operatives needed. We should have had the budget to buy what we needed instead. So maybe some of that, some good come out of that. Now, I will tell you, Jim, that something that does concern me is that Kash Patel is an outsider. He was never in the FBI. That's okay. I think that's a good thing. I don't know a lot about Kash Patel, so, the jury's still out there, how well of a job he's going to do, and he's very new. But he didn't pick an insider. So typically, when a new director is an outsider, they pick someone who's an institutionalist to help tell them where things are. Someone
Right.
who understands where all the parts of the shop and how
Right.
it all fits together. He didn't. And I feel like Dan Bongino, who's a former Secret Service agent who then became a media influencer and podcaster, radio host, I feel like Trump sort of maybe had a conversation with him and then sort of threw him in there. I would have suspected Patel as his first big decision to pick someone from within the FBI. And I think that could cause some problems for him because he doesn't know what he doesn't know.
Right. I mean, you gotta have the Sherpa,
Exactly.
who knows what's going on. At least, even if you're a change agent,
Yes.
you still have to know what's
You have to
there.
know what to change.
Right.
And most importantly, you have to be able to have someone to tell him, if you change this, this will break and cause a cascade effect and all this will break. So you don't want 2 change agents who are at the top. You want a change agent and someone to be a sounding board. And we don't have that. So that's my only real big concern with these new appointments.
Yeah, we're only a few 7 weeks in, to this new administration. It seems like it's moving so fast.
But what's really interesting about this period in our history is it's not really 7 weeks into this administration. It's 4 years and 7 weeks.
True.
So this is the second term of a president. Now, there was a gap for 4 years, but that gave Trump and his team a lot of time to think about, if we get elected, what will we do?
Oh,
And hit the
yes.
ground running. So
Yes.
they're not wasting time. He knows he only has 4 years. He can't go I know people try to throw hyperbole out there like he's going to be president for life. He's not.
No.
The American Constitution is too strong for that. But he only has 4 years, and his plan clearly is to accomplish everything he possibly can in 4 years. So he's not wasting any time.
Yeah. I had spoken to some people who were on the team from earlier, and they said, like, the executive orders, for example, they didn't just, write them on day one.
Right.
They had been working on those literally for years.
And they're more thoughtful. If you compare Trump 2 to Trump 1, those executives were written on, the orders were written on day one, and they were very easily contested. These are a little bit more difficult because there's been more mindfulness to them.
Yes.
Whether you agree with them or not,
Right.
there's a lot more structure in this second term in office, even if it looks like massive chaos, because what he is doing is he's the change agent for the entire government. There is more structure to and purpose to what he's doing than his first term.
Would you go back into government?
I thought about running for Congress once upon a time. I mean, I'm squeaky clean. I've got my background and pedigree, and there were a number of people who were trying to get me to run in my state of Maryland. And I asked my wife, because I thought, this could be exciting, right? To be back in government. And my wife's, I'll quote her, "You can do that with your next wife." So that was the end of that. Right.
Right. Well, I mean, government can use good people. So
That's true.
just throw that out there. Well, that's our show for today. I want to thank our guest, Eric O'Neill, for a fascinating discussion. Thank you so much for making time for us and for coming to our school. It's just been really great.
Jim, it's been great to have this discussion with you and to be back at IWP. I love being here.
Awesome. Well, that's it. For more information about IWP, for our programs or degree offerings, please consult our website at iwp.edu. Once again, I'm Jim Robbins. Tune in next time for another edition of the IWP podcast.
If you like our podcast and would like to hear more, please subscribe. And if you are interested in learning more about the topics we covered here today and want to be a student at IWP, go to iwp.edu and click Apply now.